Hello and welcome to a quickie guide to Phase 1 of FRU. But with that said, let's begin. Before we pull, make sure to assign players to the roles MT, OT, H1, H2, M1, M2, R1 and R2. Then split these players into two light parties, Group 1 having MT, H1, M1 and R1, and Group 2 having OT, H2, M2, and R2. Group 1 has priority on north and west and red and purple waymarks, while Group 2 has priority on south and east and yellow and blue waymarks. Then make sure everyone is assigned a clock spot. We have MT north, R2 northeast, OT east, R2 southeast, H2 south, M1 southwest, H1 west, and R1 northwest. I'm sorry that I have to do this, but all of this will be relevant throughout the entire encounter, but this will be the only time where I'll go over all of this in a phase guide. But with that said, do what suits your group the best. Anyway, when pulling Fatebreaker, make sure to drag him ever so slightly south of middle, then face him north to make the upcoming mechanic a bit easier to orientate. He'll then begin to cast Cyclonic Break with either fire or lightning around him. If it's fire, every support or DPS will be targeted with splash damage that must be soaked with another player. If it's lightning, he'll target every player with splash damage that must be taken solo. At the end of the cast, every player will be hit by a cone cleave, which will then proceed to hit the same area every player got hit and then rotate around the arena 3 times. To solve this, have everyone in their clock spots for the initial hit and take note of if it's fire or lightning. Once hit, dodge the following hits within your color. For example, I'm the main tank, so I'm on A, so I dodge within A and 1 as they're both red. Then if it's fire, pair up with the player on the same color as you for the soak, then dodge the next 2 subsequent cones by going back and forth between the 2 safe spots. If it's lightning, tanks and melees dodge like normal, but healers and ranged should go far to avoid clipping the tanks and melees. During the last cone, the boss will then cast Powder Mark Trail, a heavy hitting tank buster on the main tank, giving the tank a physical vulnerability and the Powder Mark Trail debuff. This debuff will explode into a sizable AoE around the target after 15 seconds, and also hit the closest player to the target with another AoE, both hitting for heavy tank damage. Then the boss will cast Utopian Sky, and just like Cyclonic Break, he'll have either fire or lightning effects around him. This time though, fire is a 4-player stack on the healers, while lightning remains the same as Cyclonic Break, being spreads on every player. These won't happen just yet, so you have to remember before he goes if he did fire or lightning. Once the cast has finished, the boss will become untargetable. Let's begin with the tank buster, Powder Mark Trail. For the initial hit, I use my 2-minute defensive, rampart, and short cooldowns, in my case the Blackest Night and Oblation, and it's enough to survive. Then the off tank will provoke off me, because the boss will immediately follow this up with an auto attack, and because I have a physical vulnerability, this will instantly kill me and instantly trigger the Powder Mark Trail, which can be bad. Then for the following damage, I use my personal, Dark Mind, and another Oblation, along with the remaining time on Rampart. Unfortunately, 2-minute defensives only last 15 seconds, and the Powder Mark Trail debuff also lasts 15 seconds, so it doesn't seem possible to catch both the initial hit and the debuff hit, but Rampart can cover both quite comfortably. Then as the boss isn't targetable, and I need to be here for an upcoming mechanic, I go north and then shuffle slightly to the west, while my off-tank goes northwest and shuffles slightly towards north. This ensures they will get targeted by the second hit of the Powder Mark Trail debuff, which they can either use every single one of their defensive cooldowns for, or use everything except their 2-minute defensive, which they can save for a future tank buster. Anyway, when the boss isn't targetable, he'll spawn an ad on every cardinal and intercardinal. 3 of these ads will raise their swords and cast Blasting Zone, a large line AoE in front of them which will one-shot players caught by them. This will leave only 2 safe spots on either cardinals or intercardinals. As the Blasting Zones go off, fire stacks will also go off, or lightning spreads. To solve this, have every player take their clock spot cardinal and go to the wall, except the off tank and R2. These 2 will swap, so the off tank can take the tank buster with the main tank. Now, why we go to the wall is because the ads are only visible when you're right up next to them. So the next step is to pay attention to your ad and the opposite player to you. If the ad raises his sword, move forward to indicate to the rest of your party that your spot is unsafe. If your ad doesn't raise his sword, pay attention to the player opposite of you. If they move forward, you should also move forward to help visualize that these two spots are unsafe. If your ad doesn't raise his sword and the player opposite of you also doesn't move, this means that your spot and the player opposite of you are safe spots. Lucky for you, you're already in the safe spot. If you have to move to indicate your spot isn't safe, then just look for the player who is standing still on your waymark priority. In our case, Group 1 has priority on red and purple waymark safe spots. Now we have to solve either if it's fire or lightning. If it's fire, pretty simple, just stack up with your light party in the safe spot. If it's lightning, then we need to spread out within the safe spot. For this we have healers in front, tanks back middle, melees left, and ranged right. Any configuration works, we just wanted to have healers in front so healing the party is easier for them. To position correctly and not get hit by the blasting zone or clip each other with your lightning spreads, make sure to use the markings and crystals on the arena. For the front player, just stand on this line, no further. For the other 3 players, you'll notice these crystal-like things around the arena. These are your positioning friends when it comes to ultimate fights, so keep that in mind. But for now, as the back middle player, just stand directly in front of this big crystal. And for the left and right players, count 4 of the small crystals from the big one and place yourself just before the 4th crystal. Once that's solved, Fatebreaker will still be untargetable, but will cast another Cyclonic Break. Handle this the exact same way as you handle the first one. During this, an ad will spawn slightly north with either fire or lightning. Then another ad will spawn west with lightning and start casting Burnt Strike, which will cleave through from west to east with a one-time expanding AoE. Then another ad will spawn north with fire, and fire and lightning rings will appear. Then 2 more ads will appear, tethering 2 random players. And then the north ad will finish his Burnt Strike, cleaving from north to south and then knocking back players. Then the rings will go off and the tethered players will be bound and targeted by Sin Smoke, a 4-player stack. You can actually live this stack with less than 4 players, but if you do that, the players caught in that stack get a pretty significant damage down, which makes the phase pretty unclearable, but still proggable. It seems all chaotic, but trust me, it's not as bad as it seems, and everything is very static with very few variables. During the Cyclonic Break, make sure Group 1 heads towards north and Group 2 goes south while dodging. This will make positioning for the future mechanic easier. The first ad will be either fire or lightning. This will indicate which side is safe when the rings appear. If this ad is fire, then the side with the lightning rings will be safe. If the ad is lightning, then the side with the fire rings will be safe. So keep this in mind as it's important to know where to get knocked back to. Now that our group are split between north and south, stay clear from the middle to not get hit by the lightning burnt strike that expands. Once that has gone off, head towards the safe side, either fire or lightning. Here you'll have to solve tethers before the knockback, with adjusters having a little leeway afterwards. The simple solution is to have a priority system of sorts. If 2 tethers are within the same group, one tether player needs to move to the other party. My group does TMRH, meaning tanks have highest priority to swap while healers always stay, and if it's a melee and a ranged tethered, then the melee will move. You'll also need one role to be an adjuster. As tanks are the highest priority to swap tethers in my group, we also have tanks be the adjusters, but really any role will work. As the adjuster, all you need to look out for is if your group has no tethers, in which case you'll swap over to the other group as one of the tethered players from that group will swap to your original group. Anyway, as you're in the correct group now, wait for the fire burnt strike to go off, walk into it and get pushed back between the rings. If you're an adjuster and you haven't adjusted yet, you have time just after the rings go off here to move into the correct group. Tethers on the other hand cannot get away with this movement. The boss will then return and stay targetable throughout the phase. He'll also cast Burnished Glory. This is a heavy hitting raid wide that also applies a bleed effect. So make sure to use some mitigation on this to not only cover the initial hit, but also reduce the damage of the bleed. The boss will then cast Fall of Faith, which will tether a random player, and then 3 ads will spawn tethering 3 more players, one at a time. These tethers are either fire or lightning. Fire tethers will do 1 cleave at the closest player to the tethered player. This is a 3-player stack, but just like the previous tethers, can be lived through with less, but again will result in a significant damage down. Lightning will cleave the 3 closest players to the tethered player. To handle this, first form a conga line. My group does HRM TTMRH. This will bottom ladder after the tethers. For the tethers, we have tethers 1 and 3 go west, tethers 2 and 4 go east. For my group, we called out the number of our tethers, but if you do lack communication, you can just count the tethers as they come out one at a time. The remaining players in the conga line will now adjust to either the west or east side, with the furthest remaining player west to go to the west group and bait north if the tether is lightning. The second furthest player west will also go to the west group and bait south if the tether is lightning, while tether players will swap positions on the west side, and for the east side, we'll look at the players closer to the east, with the furthest remaining player east to go to the east group and bait north if the tether is lightning, and then the second furthest player east will bait south if the tether is lightning, and tether players will swap positions on the east side, just like with the west side. And if it's fire tethers, then all players should be stacked up on either the west side if you're west, or the east side if you're east. The boss will then do another burnished glory into a powder mark trail, which we use an invulnerability through. Fatebreaker will then turn north and do either a fire or lightning burnt strike, and 3 towers will spawn either west or east. These towers will need a random player count from 1 to 4, adding up to a total of 6. Just after the burnt strike, the towers and the powder mark trail will go off. Because of the powder mark trail, the tanks are excluded from doing this mechanic, except they'll always go to the side without towers, with the main tank taking the north position and the off tank taking the south position. If you want to be extra spicy, you can pop all of your defensives here and just stack the tanks together to maximize uptime and lessen the risk of a DPS baiting the second hit of the powder mark trail. For everyone else, first position on the side with towers, and have 3 players anchor towers. We have H1 north, R2 middle, and H2 south. Essentially all of our casters so they don't have to move as much. The other 3 players will adjust with a small priority system, from M1 to M2 to R1, from north to south. So if north needs 2 players, middle needs 3, and south only needs 1, then M1 will take the north tower with H1, and M2 and R1 will take the middle tower with R2, with south not needing any more players other than the H2 anchor. And make sure to identify the burnt strike. If it's fire, then it will be a knockback, so you have to ride the knockback into your towers. If it's lightning, then it will be much easier, as you can just chill in your tower. After all that, the boss will then start casting a final burnished glory with a longer cast. This one is the Enrage. This isn't really a problem to meet, as you get 2 2-minute burst windows and a potion if you're feeling generous. Also, if anyone does die during this phase but you manage to recover and you didn't use potion in the opener, then use potion for the second 2-minute burst window to make meeting the DPS check here easier. And you should also have LB1 if you really need it. And that's phase 1, so stay tuned for phase 2, and thank you for watching. And thank you always to my Patreons for supporting the channel further. If you liked the video, make sure to give a like, comment, subscribe, activate the bell, share it with all your friends and family, broadcast it in your area, and start a cult. Anyway, goodbye.